Are you happy? Give me a hand raise or not on that. All right, put them down before I start counting too much, okay? I saw quite a few hands. We're good with that. Now, one so-called expert, this was actually a couple of decades ago. I couldn't find a more recent one that really seemed to fit this sermon, but he estimated that only 20% of the population of this country is truly happy, that they would even say that. And he looked at some surveys and things where people would say, yes, I consider myself happy or not. 20%. Now again, exactly how you truly measure that, I don't know. But happiness seems like so many other valuable things that we want to have, you could throw in there with peace and other qualities of mind and life like that. It seems so important to us that we devote so much energy of thought and emotion and so much of our lives to finding happiness, and yet it also seems so elusive at the same time. It's like that bird that you're trying to put that salt on their tail to catch the bird. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, see me after the sermon, all right? Here's how one psychologist put it. He said that happiness is an imaginary condition. This is his perspective. Formerly attributed by the living to the dead, now usually attributed by adults to children, and by children to adults. Happiness. Everybody wants it, but it almost seems like nobody really has a good possession on it. Nobody has happiness. We search for it, and yet so often it seems we come up empty, like sand running out of our hands. Well, as we survey this together this morning, and I thought, what a great way to kind of kick off officially summer by thinking about happiness. You know, school's out, and some of us have already had summer vacations to the beach. Some of us are getting ready for trips. Some of us are getting ready for church camps and sports camps. Maybe we should be reminded this morning of what real happiness means. Happy. Let's look at it in three ways this morning. The search for happiness. Let's spend a few more minutes thinking about it, being reminded of the usually failed human experiment in search of happiness, the search for happiness, and then consider the source of happiness, of real happiness. By the way, I'm going to use, and you'll see this on the handout on the screen, I'm going to use happy, happiness, joy somewhat interchangeably. And I realize there's a whole discussion about happiness and how you can define it as more just a temporary feeling or something like that, and joy is something more deep-seated. For the purpose of this sermon, I'm not really going to get more into that than just that. Acknowledge that, and we're going to look at the basic idea of being happy and joyful in God this morning. And then, after the source, our sharing in happiness. The search for happiness, the source of happiness, and then the way that we get to almost participate in the happiness of God. Search, source, and sharing. We begin then with the search. And here we are traveling. You got to put on your imagination cap this morning. We're traveling through the desert. We're out in the wilderness. And we're thirsty. Oh, so thirsty. If you didn't get some hydration before the sermon, well, it's too late now, all right? It's just going to get worse from here on. There was actually a sermon I preached years ago in Cordell, and I actually poured water from one glass into another glass, and there was one lady that told me after the sermon, she's like, I didn't drink very much that morning, and you don't know how thirsty I was by the time the sermon was over. We're thirsty. Our hearts, our souls, just our being, we are thirsty. Now, of course, breaking away, we're thirsty for happiness, for satisfaction, for something, for someone that will bring it to us. And then we want to keep it. That's the real tricky part, isn't it? That's the clincher, is not just finding something that makes you happy, but really makes you happy. It's almost like the song, searching for love in all the wrong places. We do that with happiness. We search, and maybe we're searching in all the wrong places. Well, here are 4 of them this morning. And because there are 4, and because we could spend a lot of time on each one, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this in overview fashion. But 4 examples or categories of the search that comes up empty. The first one is that sometimes we look to happiness, or for happiness, we look to things like pleasure and entertainment. I'm going to qualify that and say earthly pleasure, or we look for the little pleasures that God does give us that are ultimately a reflection of Him and His joy and the pleasure that is found in God. But we look to those little earthly gems for true, lasting happiness. And things like even sinful pleasure comes in there, where we've actually departed away from something that's good in itself into something that becomes more than that, or should we say less than that, becomes wrong in itself too. And part of why sin is why it works is because it does have a kind of pleasure to it. Now, as we've already mentioned, it is fleeting, and that's where Hebrews chapter 11 comes in. The example of Moses and how Moses was willing to forsake, in Hebrews 11:25, the fleeting, or your English version might say the passing pleasures of sin. But I'm suggesting this morning, can't you apply that to a different way, but doesn't that ultimately apply to even pleasures that are not sinful in themselves? Or things like entertainment that may distract us, they may help us to unwind after a long day, but they don't satisfy our longing hearts. Jesus, in His parable of the seed and the soils in Luke chapter 8, He mentions in verse 14 of Luke 8, how the pleasures of this world, among a couple of other categories, but at least in this case, the pleasures of this world can, among other things too, choke our hearts. And there in that passage, it's that it chokes the Word of God working in our hearts. Pleasure, entertainment, that may provide something, but not that ultimate something we're after. There are a number of references to Ecclesiastes this morning in this consideration. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, where we read about the idea of pursuing this kind of thing, of pleasure and achievement that might satisfy. Now, if there's any document or book in the Bible that comes with the requirement that you have to read the whole thing, I think if there's any, it would be Ecclesiastes. One way of summarizing this document is that it is the happiness experiment, where the writer, let's say Solomon, pursues different avenues like these. His search for happiness. And what he finds each time is there may be something to it, especially in its more healthy form, but it still leaves you wanting something more. But sometimes we search for happiness in trying to create all of the pleasure and entertainment we can. And I don't have to tell you this morning that we are a culture that is extremely full of all of that. And yet, I don't know how happy we are as a culture. Entertainment and pleasure is part of the pursuit, but not the answer. Another category this morning, of course, is money and possessions, assets, wealth, you name it. We go through life, and sometimes we even hear the message from our world, through the God of this world, you just need more. And we make jokes about it. We talk about advertisements and the way that appeal is presented to us. And maybe it's an item, a product, that if you just had this, if you just pull out your phone right now, maybe even just scan the QR code on the TV screen, and you order this, it might even show up that day. I mean, same-day delivery now sometimes with Amazon, right? I mean, you get it, and at least it's implied you will be happy. Will you? You buy that new car, and then Western Oklahoma gets a hailstorm. You get the first scratch, right? The first dent. Or after a while, the new car smell is gone. And of course, when you drive it off the lot, you lose now almost, it seems like half the value, right? And now, instantly, it's not a new car anymore, not really. It's a used vehicle. Let's turn in our Bibles to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. Now, this is Jesus' response to a question from what seems to be maybe a potential disciple, but someone wanting him to help them settle their financial accounts. And his answer is the introduction here to a parable that I encourage you to read on your own sometime. But notice the summary in this introduction. In Luke 12, verse 15, Jesus says, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness." The desire that becomes unhealthy desire for things and money. He says, take care, be on guard, as if you've got to fight this. And then makes this observation. Jesus says, life does not consist in the abundance of our possessions. And that's Jesus telling us something that we even realize and learn as we live this life, don't we? I mean, this part is a mixture of that, isn't it? You can look at your own life. You can look around you at other people in your life. You can look at the world. You can look at celebrities. You can look at billionaires. And you realize that none of that is the test. How much money you have or the things you have, the quality or quantity, none of that has anything really to do with your happiness. Sometimes it may actually make things worse. I think it was Elvis Presley, at least the story is told. I tried to confirm it before I used it, so I'm going to say the story was told that near the end of his life, a few months before his death, an interviewer asked Elvis, they said, when you started your career, you said you wanted three things. You wanted to be famous, rich, and happy. How's that working out? And that all his answer is that he was terribly lonely. Happiness does not come from what we have or what we own or what we get to use. You'll find that Ecclesiastes basically says money doesn't last, it doesn't satisfy. The proverb writer, the Wisdom of Solomon written there, says it's like a bird that flies away. Go back to the salt on the bird's tail, right? That it doesn't last. If nothing else, it's here today and gone tomorrow. A third category this morning, people. We sometimes convince ourselves that if we can find the right person to marry, or if we can have kids, or if we can find the right friends, or maybe just one good friend, or the right circle, whatever it is, then I'll be happy. In Romans chapter 8, now this might seem like an odd passage to go to for this, but it's such a beautiful picture of God's love in Jesus. And that's where the Apostle Paul lays out, he says, anything, even death itself, whatever it is, whatever power it has, and he says at the end, nothing can separate us from this love. That's divine love. But the love that we have among people, the relationships we have, they are a special blessing, one of the highest blessings in this life, but they were never intended to be that ultimate satisfaction or source of happiness. How many people find that right person and then they're still not happy? Or how many times do we do this? We justify sin by happiness. And we'll say, well, this person makes me happy. Or God wouldn't want me to be unhappy. I remember years ago an NFL player that was explaining his adulterous relationship and ending his marriage, and that was what he said. They said, why are you doing this? And he said, God wants, and then he said his own name, to be happy. That's my explanation. Which is Hebrews 11. Go back to Hebrews 11. That's Hebrews 11 turned on its head. That's when I decided to pursue the passing pleasures of sin instead of the treasure of God. Look at Hebrews 11 again, verses 25, and then include the positive side in 26. You put your trust for even happiness in people, and at the very best, I know we don't like to think about this, but the best people in your life, if there is somebody in your life that you think is close enough to perfect, whether it's a parent or a mentor or a spouse or whoever, the best and most perfect person in your life, at their best, won't be around forever. They may not fail you in any other way. They may be loyal in every way, but they cannot defeat mortality. People and relationships, for various reasons, will not satisfy. Here's the last one this morning. And you could tie this in with all of them. It's kind of an overall that circumstances or achievements and success, that also doesn't work. It's in Ecclesiastes 2 is also that we see the idea of work and labor and we might call it career today and resume building. That doesn't bring true happiness. We're reminded in James chapter 4 that even things like our business plans are subject to change, sometimes big change. Circumstances come and go. You get the degree, and then that brings the stress of deciding what to do with the degree and interviews and waiting for people to call you back or at least email you back. You get the promotion at that job, and that promotion brings new stressors into your life, and maybe you got to work more now. You get married, and that you think is going to make, that's the thing, and well, that brings, I'm not even going to get into that right now. That's a sermon on marriage, but we think right? If I can do this, if only. Go back to the new car, right? Or you buy that house, that big house you've wanted, and then the AC goes out 2 weeks later in the middle of summer, right? I mean, you get me. The search for happiness is like wandering in the desert, thirsty, and you think you see it, and you pick it up, you reach in, and what you think is, and it's just a mirage. And you're holding your clumps of sand. And the problem is not the things that we're after, it's that none of those things are God. And so they, in themselves, even the good things won't make us happy. That's why we have to go to the source. And so we're wandering through the desert. Now, by the way, this is what I'm taking with me to camp this afternoon. This is my camp water bottle. But it's like we're wandering through the desert and we pick up the canteen and we open it up. And I got to try to do this with all this in my hand this morning. Y'all didn't really think there was something in here, did you? And maybe there's a drop or two. And maybe there's enough for one. But now it's empty. What do you do with an empty canteen? What do you need? You need to find the source of the water. And so think with me about this question. Is God, and I better make sure I don't leave this right this afternoon, but is God happy? And that may seem like an odd question to you, but it's an important one. Is God happy? As you read through Scripture, and here's just some samples this morning, God is seen as a God who rejoices, a God who has happiness in Himself. He doesn't need us. That's not, by the way, why He created us. He didn't create us because He's miserable and lonely and He needs us to make Him happy. He doesn't need anything at all, including He doesn't need a source of happiness because He is the source. He is called the blessed God. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, the beginning of the letter, and then in chapter 6 at the end of the letter, just two examples here. There's so many of these throughout Scripture where God is called blessed. But another word for that is happy or joyful. He's the blessed or the happy God. And then He's a God who's seen to rejoice. Now, the word is not used in Genesis chapter 1, but after God finishes His creation, He has crowned His creation with humanity. We do see God expressing that His creation is very good. That seems to be an example of God, yes, then rejoicing in and about what He has made. That He appreciates what is good and what is functional and what is beautiful because it is a reflection of His goodness and beauty, His own happiness then expressed over His creation. And then Zephaniah chapter 3. You got to look at this one. Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 17. The people of God there are given a number of promises about and from their God. Notice that one that says that He will rejoice over you with or in gladness. That my God, our God, rejoices over His people, over us. And then even goes on to say that He will exult with loud singing. You ever thought about God as a happy God who rejoices over us and even sings, and He's singing out loudly because of us? So no, He doesn't need us to make Him happy. He's already happy, but He is happy in and over us. And then kind of on the other side of that, it's in the parable in Luke 15, verse 10. When Jesus says there is more joy before the angels in heaven over one sinner who repents. Now notice, Jesus does not say the angels are rejoicing. Not per se. He says it's before them or even in front of them. So who is the one specifically rejoicing? It's God, who's before the face or in the presence of the angels in heaven. So that when I turn back from wallowing in the mire of my own rebellion and my own give in to Satan, and I turn to God, the prodigal returns, that does cause God to rejoice. He's happy, a happy God. He's a God who then is willing to share His joy. Jesus promises the apostles, and I see no reason why this promise is somehow limited to just the apostles. In John 15, verse 11, He does not say, mark it, He does not say, I'm giving you joy. He doesn't even say, I want you to have joy. He says, I'm saying all these things so that my joy can be your joy, and your joy then be full or satisfied. And so now, I've found the source of happiness. It is the God who made me. And now, as I wander thirsty in the wilderness, I've picked up empty canteen after canteen. And now it's not a mirage anymore. Now I have found the oasis. And it is not so much an achievement or something I have to do to have. It's more of something I receive from God as the source of happiness. It's that I get to share in His happiness. Or as we saw from John 15:11, that He shares His happiness with me. How do I do that? What does that look like? It looks like being a blessed person. We can read about it in Psalm 1. I don't know that we read Jeremiah 17 as often, but in Jeremiah 17, he starts in verse 5 with the wicked person, the person who's not seeking God, and what that life looks like. And then he describes the blessed or happy person. And you'll notice as you read these passages that this truly happy life in God is not free of trouble or stress or sorrow. It's a life that one person said, and you have the tree imageries used in both these texts, that it's not that this life never has any heat. It's that this life has roots that can't be destroyed by any heat. That's the kind of rooted joy or happiness and satisfaction I have in God. That I have a joy that can't be compared. Let's read in Psalm 4, the last two verses of this psalm. And notice what the psalmist says about his God and joy. Psalm 4, verse 7, he says this, "You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abounds." Go back to the search for happiness. Now I have the source of happiness, sharing His happiness with me. And then verse 8 is like one example of an extension of this kind of happiness. It brings the kind of peace. As I come to God, as I receive salvation through His Son, as I put Him on through baptism, as I do all of that, and now I'm walking with my God, it's not a guarantee that I won't ever have a sleepless night, but it is a promise that I will have peace. Verse 8 says, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." There is a joy that you can't find a comparison in the world. There's a joy that comes from knowing God and being known by God. There's a strength that comes from that. Part of why other sources of happiness don't satisfy is because then life happens and those other sources are not enough. But the happiness that God gives is enough that even in suffering, even in problems and sorrow, we can still rejoice. Why? Because the joy of the Lord is our strength. Because we have hope past even this life and its troubles. That's part of it. Is that we're able to know that I have a hope that is beyond and over and after this world. That's why Romans chapter 5 says we even rejoice. And Paul writes there with a plural and says we as Christians, and this is still a struggle for some of us, but he says we can rejoice in our sufferings. We rejoice in the peace we have and the justification we have by faith, Romans 5:1 in the first part of 2. But then he goes on to say, and even rejoice over our sufferings. Why? Because we have the hope of the glory of God that awaits us. And with confidence in God, we look to that so that our joy, our happiness no longer depends on our circumstances or our successes, but on the God who promises like that. A God who says, rejoice. Not in your small victories, not in your momentary excitements. Rejoice that you know in me that your name is written in the Lamb's book of life in heaven. And so now, it's not that I come and I fill up my canteen. It's now that I just get to come and enjoy the joy of the oasis of God Himself. Happiness. We look for it. And relationships break. Money, sometimes to our shock, just seems to disappear. Our health fails. Our successes come, and then what? But the source of real, lasting happiness is in a God who never just comes and goes, and a God whose love is unfailing, a God whose peace surpasses human understanding, a God whose promises are never broken. And He lets me share. He shares His joy with us. Are you happy? Let's close with the words of another psalm that says, "Blessed, happy are the people whose God is the Lord." Let's stand and sing together.